I don't like ministers asking for money. So I want to thank you, but I do also in this instance want to say that if you haven't already contributed, there will be the possibility to do that at the end of our time together. You know where it is going. You know why it is going. So thank you. As we start this afternoon, we want to look at Palestine and find a way to explore some of the systematic injustices that exist there, because they form the context to what is going on. I mentioned to you this morning that 20 years ago this year, I was in Gaza, I was in Palestine, in the occupied Palestinian territories, and that was an experience that really changed my life and is in part why we are here today in the midst of everything. And what I want to do is to get at some of those issues of injustice through the stories of people who were experiencing it. So to humanize what was going on, what is going on, and what is going on in a much more intense way now. So I want to introduce you to two women, Nazar Halta and Abla Nazir. Look at them. Normal, ordinary women. Women committed to their people, Palestinian people, and giving children primarily a start in life and the best opportunity to flourish that they can. They work for the Young Women's Christian Association in Palestine. They work with everyone, no matter who they are. They are committed women, you know, and they're a danger in some people's eyes to what is happening there. These are the people that they work with. Children. Children in a school. These are kids that are probably around the same age that Rita was in 2005. These, like Rita, are refugee children. So fourth generation, third generation refugees in their own land, being provided with a space to learn, to grow, to develop. Look at them. Happy children. Look at them. Nazar is particularly interesting to me because she told a story. When I met her, her father-in-law had just died in the previous month or so. He was ravaged with memory loss, but right to the very end, he remembered where he grew up, outside of Jaffa, on a small family farm. It was the family farm that was in no, just go back to the picture of the ladies. We'll get on to Suleiman in due course. Thank you. Where he had grown up, where he had roots, and to the end, when he had forgotten everything else, he talked about how he wanted to go home. That is one of the issues that we're dealing with. People who have not forgotten where they come from. People who have been, what term can we use? Ethnically cleansed in the Nakba. That is the truth. And he wanted to go home. I link that to someone else that I met because my great-grandmother was Jewish. And I mentioned that to an Israeli human rights activist. And he looked at me immediately and he said, "Do you know you might have the right of return?" And that stunned me. And it spun my head all sorts of directions because there was I, who had never set foot in Palestine or Israel or the Middle East. And there was the possibility, if the rabbis and the Israeli authorities decided that I was Jewish enough in some part of my family history, I could return. I could return to a land where I had never been. And you have this whole generation, multiple generations of people in exile in their own land, refugees. That is the issue. How do we work with that situation? We move on now to Suleiman Abu Allah and his daughter Dua. They lived in the West Bank. You can see their land in the next slide. Or you can see their land, their divided land. To the left of that road, which you may note is a very empty road, and it's empty for a reason, is Suleiman's land, but he cannot access it. It is his farm. To the right, there is another part of his land that he can access. And he cannot access the part to the left because if we look next, you can see a development behind his daughter there, and you can see a fence around that road. That road is a Jewish-only road. It is only Jewish people that can travel on the road. And the development behind is an illegal Israeli settlement. And his farm is there in the midst of that context. Look further. You see that fence, and it sweeps up behind Suleiman's farm. Move on. Move back. At the end of our meeting, Israeli military vehicles, Land Rovers and the such, drove up that road very, very slowly, and they parked on the hill above, looking down with long-lens cameras. We wondered what was going on. And Suleiman saying, they're wondering who is here, visiting me on my farm. He said, I will get a visit sometime today from the security, the army authorities. And he did. We phoned him later in the day, and he said that he'd been visited by the Israeli army to find out what was going on, who we were. So you're talking about that level of surveillance, that lack of freedom, always being under observation. That's an issue of systemic injustice. The next one, this is Abu Said Natat. This is Gaza. We managed to get into Gaza very shortly after the Israeli army withdrew in 2005. Getting into Gaza was an experience in its own right across the Eretz crossing. We had to turn up with no guarantee that we would get in with our papers to this bunker, essentially, with small glass windows that were inches thick. And a voice spoke to us, asked us for the papers, looked at them, left us standing there for a period of time, and then said that we could proceed. We proceeded really through a series of cattle grids, through a kind of a wasteland until we emerged on the Gaza side where life was happening. One of the people we met was Abu, trying to make his farm grow again after the Israeli withdrawal. Doing a job, clearing roots and stumps, planting again on his farm. When you look at the next slide, you'll see what confronted him when he had access to his land again. You can see that it is kind of bare and a wasteland. That was because that part of his land was close to an Israeli military checkpoint. And the Israeli army, anytime Abu Said tried to do anything, like put in irrigation pipes, they came, leveled everything, ripped them up. By this stage, he was trying to put down those irrigation pipes again, to make the land fertile and to grow. And you can see that he was successful. And off his land, he was feeding an extended family of around 70 people. welcoming and generous. They were fasting, but they made sure that we had breakfast to eat. Wonderful people. In Gaza, we were really hosted by this man, Constantine Daba, who was at that stage the head of the Middle East Council of Churches. He was a Gazan. Many, many generations involved in Gaza. Like Rita, he wasn't able to get out of Gaza, or very rarely at that point 20 years ago. His family had grown. Some of them were living in the West Bank. You know, and you're talking about, one of the things that struck me about Israel was that it is so small. The distances are so small. 50 miles, his daughter and family were living. He couldn't visit them. When he tried, he could never get permissions from the Israeli authorities beforehand. He would turn up at the border crossing. He would be there early in the morning. And he would wait and wait and wait and wait all day. And then be told, no, you're not being given permission. So this is one of the issues. An issue of immense power imbalance. And an issue of control, and an issue of ritual humiliation, where one party said to the other and demonstrated to the other that we have total control over you. At one stage, he waited all day in the rain in a Palestinian winter and got seriously ill out of it. That is part of the systemic injustice that is going on. One of the things that the Middle East Council of Churches was doing was working with young men the type of which Becca is now working with, giving them skills so that in that Gaza Strip, which is, I looked this up, Gaza Strip to within a few kilometers is exactly the same size as the Ards Peninsula, and not unlike the Ards Peninsula in shape. So the situation in Gaza, which David Cameron agreed was a vast open-air prison, 2 million people or more, locked in, not able to move, not able to stay in contact with their families, not able to visit. That is the reality. That was the reality that these young men were growing up in at that stage. And you know that it has gotten so much worse since. And at that stage, all of the social indicators were that people were just about making it. Levels of poverty were very, very high, and that was intentionally designed that way. So that was what the Middle East Council of Churches was doing in the midst of that injustice. I want to introduce you to a name that you may know or you may not, Raji Sourani. He was from Gaza. He was heading up the Palestinian Center for Human Rights, the PCHR. So this was along the lines of which Rita talked. People who felt that they had a grievance, that their human rights had been violated, would go. Raji and the team of lawyers would try and work things out, try and reach a resolution. They opened one office, they opened another office. So it was clearly a line of work that sadly was proliferating. In the last number of years, the last year and a half since October 2023, Raji's home was bombed, intentionally targeted. Both offices were intentionally targeted and destroyed. Raji himself managed to get out to Cairo and from there to Britain. He delivered the annual lecture at the Royal Geographical Society in London last October. So that is a signal that, as you know, the story is getting out about what is happening. And we are part of that story. And we are thinking what we can do to be contributors to the story. That's part of our purpose today. Let me also introduce you to Jeff Halper. He is heading up the Israeli Committee Against House Demolitions. This is when the Israeli authorities identify someone from their perspective as dangerous, and rather than dealing with anything through the courts, they simply go in with bulldozers, and you can see an example of this. They destroy a home, they destroy a house, they render a family homeless. The laws go back to the Mandate colonial period. The laws are old British laws that allow them to do this, because this house demolition was first done in Palestine in 1937, and it has continued and is continuing. And in a sense, the absolute obliteration, the pulverization of Gaza is a consequence of that policy. Destruction of homes, much worse now than then, and that was bad enough. Next, I also mention Halper, Jeff Halper, because he has, within the last year or so, written a book. It's called Decolonizing Israel, Liberating Palestine, Zionism, Settler Colonialism, and the Case for One Democratic State. I mention that because we've kind of become used to hearing, the two-state solution. But you might ask yourself, if there had been any commitment, any meaningful commitment to the two-state solution, would it not have happened by now? Would those who claim to support it not have made sure that it had been enacted? So what you have here is a Jewish voice saying, no, we've got to move from this. We've got to look to a one-state solution. I simply raise that as a Jewish voice among other Jewish voices that are saying the two-state solution is dead. Ilan Pappé, the Israeli Jewish historian, who has now renounced his Jewish citizenship, has said the two-state solution is like a corpse that is brought out and people put lipstick on it when they think they want to support it and talk about it. So you have this movement towards something different, something better, something more just, as an answer to some of the issues that we're confronting. I suspect that all of you will have seen a map like this or maps like this, where historic Palestine is divided and divided and divided until it is now even more divided than the right-hand image, where it is fragmented into areas which are not viable as a state, where they are, in the old model of South Africa, Bantustans, and therefore unjust, and therefore needing to be addressed. This is the penultimate slide. It is on the coast of Gaza. If you're able to work out your geography, what is that? Is it sunrise or sunset? It is sunset. It is sunset. I want to tell you a story about another Surani that I met in Gaza, Ahmed Surani. He worked with a group called PARC, which is the Palestinian Agricultural Relief Committees, working with agricultural projects, people growing food, tending the land. He told me one wonderful evening when we'd had a meal on the shores of the Mediterranean with the sun going down, about how when his children reached the age of about 4 or 5, he would give them seeds and he would ask them to grow something. And he said he did that because it taught them that anything that is worthwhile needs to be tended and takes time. And he related that to the search for peace. He said, it will take time. So much of that has been blasted apart now. But I hold up that story for you because it gives the lie to that idea that there was no partner for peace. Everyone that we met said, we are ready for peace. That is what we want, but a just peace. A peace that recognizes that Palestinian culture that Becca has talked about and those young ladies from Gaza have talked about and Rita has talked about and Muna has talked about and that we have heard about. So we really are at a turning point. Will this be the final going down of the sun for Gaza? Or will there be a sunrise and a new day built on justice? And we are here today, I suspect, because despite everything going on, we want to do all that we can and contribute to the new day dawning. Final slide. It's a picture we saw 20 years ago. It's a child writing on a whiteboard. And what it says is, I wish to feel safe with my family and friends in my homeland. The issue is, how can we all help that to happen in our own little ways? Because we know that we're confronted with huge forces internationally and within Israel and Palestine. So I leave those thoughts with you as a way of getting at some of the systemic injustices. Thank you.
It's my pleasure to introduce our next contributor, Dr. Diane Kirby. Diane is a fellow and member of Las Casas Institute for Social Justice, Blackfriars Hall in Oxford University. If you're familiar with it, it is always good to go and look at the things that they are doing. They are doing good things. As an academic, her research has been instrumental in establishing religious dimensions to global conflicts. And if you dive into Diane's life and work, and by that I mean Google, you'll discover that she has initiated oral history projects that have interviewed notable Christians involved, particularly going back to Cold War affairs, that brought together churchmen and women to discuss their Cold War experiences, including encounters with counterparts behind the Iron Curtain. There are multiple references to that, which says something, Diane, about the significance of that and bringing in that dimension that is about the part faith has played. She's also conducted research involving, again, churchmen and women in a series of witness seminars discussing their experiences of the Northern Ireland context. Beyond her academic achievements, Diane is involved with many projects, volunteering around work with female asylum seekers and refugees from Afghanistan, Sudan, and working with their children as well. And in addition to helping enhance their English language skills, she uses her skills as an oral history trainer to give voice to women's experiences and stories. Diane was in Palestine in January this year as part of a delegation of international scholar activists. During her visit, she discovered Thank you very much, Dan. A philosophy of nonviolent resistance that embraces a vision of diverse and inclusive future encompassing all faiths, cultures, and ethnicities. Please welcome Dr. Diane Kirby.
Oh, that makes me sound really good. The first thing I want to say is thank you to Mark and to everybody that organised this event. I think it's absolutely marvellous. And I think what's very special about it is that what you have done here is what I did in January. You have met and you have heard Palestinians. And you've heard that Palestinian voice. And that is so important. And that's the thing that I learned. And so that's why I think what was done here is absolutely marvellous. So for all the research, et cetera, I did as an academic, let me tell you now, none of it prepared me for going to Palestine. And I went, I'm not an expert on the Middle East, that wasn't my area at all, but because I'm a reader, I thought I knew, and I did know a lot of factual stuff. But believe me, the factual stuff, none of it can prepare you for the reality of that encounter with the system, the unjust system. Sorry, am I not? Sorry. Could everybody hear me? I don't need to repeat it. Oh, great, good. So I think that's really what I want to address today. And actually, I'm just looking at what's on the screen, which is the Sabeel Ecumenical Liberation Theology Centre, and they were my hosts. And that's very important in terms of they are part of the non-violent resistance. And I think it's worth emphasising that non-violent resistance is the dominant resistance, even if it's only for practical reasons. That given the powerlessness, remember 95% of Palestinians have never handled a gun. We get the impression that the dominant resistance are the extreme Islamist groups. They are not. It is the non-violent simply because if you're confronting a power as great as Israel's military power, backed by the superpowers of this world, armed resistance isn't going to get you anywhere. And that's what they recognize. And that's why, as well, there is so much emphasis on needing us to help them. Because in their eyes, we have a voice. We live in democratic societies, and it's our governments that are enabling, if not responsible, for what's happening in Palestine. So, when you go there, one of the messages, and I was part of a delegation, so you're very aware that they're going to be giving you a certain message. But the whole thing was, when I was there, I was meeting people from every walk of life. I was meeting secular people, I was meeting Jewish people, I was meeting Muslims, I was meeting Christians, from journalists to politicians, to environmentalists, to scientists. I mean, it was overwhelming, and that was one of the things about it. I was overwhelmed with information. But everybody that I met had a message that I grappled with and couldn't quite understand. Because I was coming from a Western environment, I was a privileged person, and the message that they were conveying was the message that comes from an oppressed people seeking justice, a people who have been persecuted, as Rita pointed out, aware of the injustices from childhood, seeing their persecutors close up. And I've never experienced that. And, one of the things that struck me in particular about the voices that Becca showed us was when I'm English, by the way, just in case you haven't recognised my accent, but when I was 14 years old, if somebody had said to me, "What does it mean to you to be English?" I couldn't have told you, still can't tell you. And if they had said to me, "What do you want to do? What are your dreams?" They certainly were about what I could do for England. So when, if you had just been watching those little girls, you might think, well, this is constructed, this is contrived, they're a select bunch. And that's all very nice, and that does exist, but that isn't going to be everybody. But it is everybody, and this is what's special, and this is what we need to understand, that when you meet and when you listen to and when you hear Palestinians, that we can't really understand where they're coming from and what they're going through. And this idealized, and I'm not trying in any way to romanticize what Palestinians are like, but they are honed by the experience that they've had growing up in a deeply oppressive state, a state of occupation, a state of apartheid, and a state of massive injustice, supported by the rest of the world, and they're very aware of that. So what I want to emphasize here, while we've got the Sabeel on, is Sabeel believe in nonviolent resistance. That is the way forward for them. But equally, they do not condemn those that take up armed resistance. They don't think it will work. They think it can be counterproductive, but they understand. They understand the anger that drives people to take up armed resistance. And some of the people that we met, by the way, had been part of the armed resistance and realized its futility after 20 years in prison, thinking about it, reading about it, and had joined the non-violent resistance afterwards. But what we see with Sabeel, as I said, it's liberation theology, it's Palestinian liberation theology. And their message is, it's okay to give your life for the cause, but you must do no evil in seeking Palestinian freedom, and you must not kill. And I think that's a very important message that we need to take. We need to change that dominant narrative about how we view Muslims, how we view Arabs in general. And as Rita said, if we are going to look at the most diminished community in Palestine, it's the Christian community. It was 12% of the population before, and now it's, I think, something like 1.3%. So what I want to do now, I think we've got the clip, haven't we? We've got the clip of Abdel Fattah Abu Surua, and this was a real moment for me. So I want you to listen. It's only a couple of minutes. Listen very carefully, because what you're going to see and hear is the moment the term, because it's not my term, Palestinianity, the moment it is coined. And you can see him struggling for how to describe what everybody was describing to me, and which I couldn't grasp. Don't you just love technology? Is it going to go? You always think, shall I put these things in or not? Well, what I want to emphasize here is this little clip. He was one of the PowerPoints that you saw there. He's in the Aida refugee camp, and he has an art and cultural center there. Now, he actually is a scientist, and as he explained to us, if you're Palestinian, you are expected by your parents to be a doctor or an engineer, or a doctor or an engineer. So these little girls all wanting to be doctors, that is not unusual. This is expected. And that emphasis on being proud and doing some, as I said, doing something in Palestine is ingrained into the children. So it's not just what can the next generation do for Palestine, but the parents are very aware that they have a responsibility to their children. They have a responsibility to create a better future. And they have the responsibility to give their children hope, to let them have their dreams, to let them have their aspirations. And it's understanding why they stay. Again, something that if you're from the West, that you'll grapple with, because we're from a secular society. We can never understand or appreciate the faith that sustains them, including those that are secular. We can never understand, or at least I can't as an English person, that rootedness in the land that they talk about. For me, if I was in Gaza and they said, here's a plane ticket, go live with Donald Trump, which was not would be my preferred solution, I would take it. I would be out of there in an instant. Many of the people that we met, like Rita, had gone abroad and studied and could have stayed abroad because their qualifications would have given them a superb lifestyle, but they chose to go back. They chose to go back and see what can we do for our country. So have we got Abdel? Oh, we're going to come back to it. Oh, okay, right. Well, as I said, I wanted to show this. I wanted to show the way he devises this term Palestinianity. And it's right at the end of something he's told us all about. If you want to just show the clip then of the Aida refugee camp, this is where we met him, this is where we saw him. And one of the things that's important, if you look at these clips, that you see the wall, because I was completely overwhelmed. I knew about the wall, you see the surveillance towers, I knew about all of this, but when you actually get there and you see the size of the wall, and you see the size of the settlements, they are absolutely huge. And you see people, it could be my grandchildren, running around with AK-47s on their backs. And that's just the norm. All the things that I'd read about, it's one thing to read about them, it's another thing to experience them. And because I was with Palestinians, I got the same harassment that they got, and remember, it was far, far more limited because the people we were with, Sabeel, are well known. It's well known that they take delegations there. They look at your identity all the time. So they knew we were an international delegation. There were only 6 of us from Japan, from South Korea, from Myanmar, from Canada, from America, and me. I was down as being from Ireland, you'll all be pleased to know. Unfortunately, they didn't detect from my accent that I wasn't, because the Irish are very highly thought of for all the reasons that everybody here is well aware of. So that, being on those other roads, being held up, being interrogated, there's a sense of menace. I think anybody here would say, I know many of you will have lived through the Troubles, but there is a sense of menace when you are confronting people who are very young, armed to the teeth. It's not a comfortable environment to be in, and you feel about the fact that you're in prison, that you're under constant surveillance, and the level of harassment, which is totally for no reason. I was kept at the airport for half an hour. Another one of the people coming through with us was a war correspondent. She was kept another half hour. Coming back, we were sat 3 hours in the sun while tourist buses and people on Israeli number plates were able to go freely to the airport. So you can never plan anything. We had to allow a day to get there and a day to get back, simply because of the levels of bureaucracy. So, you read about the harassment and you read about the checkpoints and you think you understand it, but you don't. You don't understand it till you're sat there and you're being held up and you've got an appointment and you can't make it, or you've got an appointment and they can't make it. And this is just the norm. This is just the norm for Palestinians. So that's the Aida refugee camp. And I think next, which is the same place, you'll see the key. And it's exactly what Rita said. This symbolises everywhere you went, you see people have keys. And the symbolism here, of course, is their homes. They're very aware that they are refugees. They're very aware of their history in a way that certainly I, as an English person, probably because the history is that of imperialism and colonialism, would not be aware. Okay, if we can go to the next clip. Oh yes, this is important. This is what I'm wanting to stress all the way through about non-violent, creative, beautiful resistance. That is the essence of what is Palestinianity. And this was the message that people were trying to convey. But it does tend to come across a little bit like a construct. And you know that you're meeting people who are part of this, and you know there is more to the story. But when you hear that message, just like the young girls this morning, repeating the same thing, and this is, can we get Abdel Fattah on now? No, is he? I thought he was at the beginning. Okay, right. Don't worry if we can't. What I wanted to show you is because we were there to hear about the art centre, the art and cultural centre that he'd established, because he felt that art was one way to inspire young people. He had a drama school in particular, where that meant you could take them away out of Palestine. They could see other lives of the peoples and recognise that potential. For a normal life, what a normal life should be. So just as we went to the Tent of Nations, just as they showed us their environmental projects, just as we went to science places, just as we went to Al-Haq and they told us all about their legal processes that never come to fruition. They very rarely win a case, but they take every case and they document everything. And people should be aware they've just taken the British government to court. But to them, it doesn't matter whether or not they win. The fact is they are documenting it. And again, it's faith in the future. It's faith that someday there will be some degree of accountability. But at the end, people were always wanting to stress, just as Rita did. You know, we love dancing, we love music, we love life. We love our families, we love our friends. We want there to be world peace. All these various things. Everybody ended up with that. And then one of the things that I realized, because I'm grappling, remember, I'm overwhelmed physically, I'm overwhelmed mentally, there's so much to take in. But at the end, one of the things that I realized, everybody that I met, and remember, I'm meeting people like Mustafa Barghouti, Munther Isaac, people who have world standing, and they're all telling me, I'm a human being. And I'm sort of thinking, I know that. But what you realize when they're all telling you that is that they feel they have to stress to us their humanity. That this is really important because they have lived under 77 years of occupation, under a power that tells not just the world, but tells them, you are less than human. You are animals. You deserve nothing but starvation and slaughter. And they're very aware of that. I have never in my life gone anywhere and felt the need to tell someone, I'm human. I have humanity. It's a taken anywhere else. And this is what I couldn't understand. I just couldn't take it in that these people of such standing, such resolution, such courage were having to tell me I'm a human being. So that was what I wanted you to see. And so when Abdel said he was looking for a word because he'd gone through this rigor about the food, and we had the upside-down chicken, which is wonderful. He dropped it, but that didn't take away from how delicious it was. You could see he was struggling for a word, just as I was struggling to understand. And he found the word, Palestinianity, and it opened a door for me. And it made me more aware of what I was seeing. And I've got to be honest, I'm still struggling with and grappling with all that I've seen and all that I've heard. And, trying to make sense of it. Let's see how long I've got, because I'm going to leave plenty of time for questions. Right, so some of the things that I want to stress is because, as I said, that encounter with Palestinians is so important. And as we know, Jewish voices are amongst the most powerful voices on behalf of the Palestinian cause. And if you read their accounts, this is a journey. It's a long struggle. One of the people that we met was Lee Mordecai, and he was just on that journey. And that's why he turned to Sabeel. But he hadn't completed it. But if you read the ones like Miko Peled, who have completed it, there is a turning point. It's not simply recognizing the level of indoctrination to which you have been subjected. It's not simply recognizing the injustice of what your people are doing to another people. The turning point is when you meet Palestinians, when you talk to them. And Miko Peled talks about this. He talks about how they were not, for starters, obviously, they were not the monsters bent on his destruction that he had been led to believe. But beyond that, he found they were kind, they were generous, they were funny, and they charmed him, if you will, just as they charmed me. And I think that's important, that meeting of Palestinians. And of course, as you know, he was a son of a general. He was from a family of committed founding Zionists. So the other thing that then was impressive to him was to discover the extent to which the majority of people were committed to nonviolent resistance. So if we could just put the slide on there, can we go on a bit more? The next slide. Yeah, okay. I brought on Nelson Mandela because I think Nelson Mandela and the experience of South Africa is clearly very important to the Palestinians. It's that model that gives them hope. They look at it all the time. And they look at Nelson Mandela, and of course, obviously he supported them, but it's his example of the Rainbow Nation, his example as, if you will, a victorious leader who then reached out the hand of peace and reconciliation to his former enemies. This is precisely what they want to do. Now, if you listen to the Israeli and Western narrative, it's that there is no Palestinian Nelson Mandela. Well, I can tell you, if you go to Palestine, there are an abundance of Nelson Mandelas. And remember, one of the problems why we don't hear about them is whenever any leader of caliber comes forward, they're killed, they're assassinated. Israel has a whole structure in place to diminish and demonize and discredit them. But believe me, everybody that I met could give, well, certainly could give a lot of lessons in leadership. The other point that was stressed to me is that they don't want to be seen as victims. They don't want pity. They're very aware that they live on United Nations handouts. But they want to stress we live on United Nations handouts because you won't let us, you don't give us the opportunity to flourish and meet our potential. Having said which, if you look at the statistics in Israel, it's something like a quarter of Israeli doctors are Palestinian, a quarter of dentists are Palestinian, 50% of Israel's nurses are Palestinian. And it's even higher for health workers. So, just as Rita and just as those little girls said, they really value education. And they want people to realize that given the opportunity, we don't want handouts, we're not victims. We will prosper. The other element to this is they do not see themselves as any more of a victim than anybody else. And they identify with people all over Africa, people all over the global south, who also suffer oppression and persecution, often supported by Western governments. That's very important. They identify as well, and this I think is equally important, with Holocaust victims. They very much identify with them. And one of the things that they feel is this is what Edward Said said, we are the victims of the victims. And that has made them aware that when we rid ourselves, as they are confident they will, of our victim status, we will not become oppressors. We will not do what Holocaust survivors did. Victims who become oppressors, helping the people that oppressed you oppress other people. They are determined. And this is why they also want to stress all the time their humanity and the way in which previous victims, and obviously I'm talking here about the Holocaust victims, have lost their humanity. They talk about Israel constructing these walls, these prison surveillance towers, everybody in the IDF almost, and they talk about this prison camp, which Israel has become, imprisons the Israelis more than it imprisons them. Over 77 years, they have developed strategies in order to break out of their prison, particularly with their minds. They might not be able to physically break out, but mentally they have broken out, and they refuse to allow themselves to be dehumanized. Their feeling is the Israelis have imprisoned themselves and they have dehumanized themselves. And one of the things, there are certain moments. I was with a group of scholars, two of which were genocide scholars. One was from Myanmar and one was from Japan. The man from Myanmar would get very emotional because, of course, the Rohingya people and what's going on there. So he very much related to the Palestinian experience. And at one point, we were listening to a historian who was telling us about why his family had stayed after the Nakba, and why they hadn't left. His father had been in the Ottoman army, and he'd seen people in refugee camps, and he'd seen the lives they lived. And his attitude was, we might as well stay here and take our chances, because what we do know is refugee camp existence is no existence. But anyway, he was talking to us. He actually was the leader of the Balad party, and so he was a politician. He had been in the Knesset. And as I said, one of the delegation just got very upset and said the Jews are evil, the Israelis are evil. I hate them. And Sammy was his name. Sammy turned around and he went, "We can't think like that. We will not let them make us hate. And in the future, we have to live with them." And again, this is something that I think is very important. And it's not until you actually hear those words and see it. And when you're looking at somebody, you can see this is not an act. You can see this is something that for 77 years, they have had time to think about who they are and what they want to become and what future they want for their state and for their children. If we can just go on to the next slide. Yeah, what I've done here, and this is a 3-hour lecture, but I put down the traits that Palestinians would say they value. And if you look at them, they're all in counterpoint to Jewish supremacy or any supremacy. I mean, I think people would take a very different attitude in the West if we weren't saying Jewish settler colonialism, if we were just saying European and American settler colonialism. We would see what an anachronism it is. If we took away the Holocaust and were just looking at this as a settler colonial project that is slaughtering the indigenous people, we would all be horrified. It's the Holocaust and the European and American guilt that is manipulated about the Holocaust, and hence about our let's see what time it is. Okay, right, just got another few minutes, so I think you could do your own list here. But I think part, as I said earlier, part of this creation, if you will, because everything is a construct, of Palestinian identity is seeing Jewish identity and what the practice of Israel, the systematic injustices, has done. And I know Rita's parents are atheists, and I met plenty of secular people as well. But faith, obviously I was with a Christian group, but met people secular and religious, and they value their faith because, again, it's one of the things they feel Israelis have lost. Israelis have lost their Judaism, and they're not going to allow the Jews to make them hate and to lose the values of their faith, the values of what it means to be a Palestinian. So you can see that none of what the Palestinians feel about themselves and feel about their identity is untrue, but a lot of it has evolved because they are the oppressed. And certainly in Sabeel, if any of you read Munther Isaac, and if you haven't read Munther Isaac, I certainly recommend that you do read Munther Isaac. And certainly for those of you that are Christians here, one of the things that he argues, and I think that you can appreciate, is that the Palestinians, the Christian Palestinians, identify with Jesus, that he was a refugee, he was persecuted, he was one of the oppressed, he was one of the poor, he had to flee. He could have been subjected, was nearly subjected to a deliberate policy that wanted to murder children. So all of these things, they're very aware of their situation and how to rectify that situation. And I would be one of those who've watched what's unfolding and just been horrified, and at times I've felt, as I'm sure everybody here is, grief, anger, and utter despair. But they keep on hoping. They keep on fighting. And I think we have to as well. We have to recognize that our humanity is linked to their humanity. And if we don't stand up for them, we will be the lesser for it. And as the protesters chant every weekend, in our thousands, in our millions, we are all Palestinians. Thank you.
I am going to thank Diane on your behalf for that presentation on that really cutting-edge concept of Palestinianity. I'm not going to take questions now. We are going to have a plenary session, and hopefully we can hold questions until then. When we were thinking about who to invite to today. As I said, you speak to your friends, and one of my oldest, closest friends is the Reverend Dr. Peter Cruchley. We are now friends for nearly 40 years. And when I spoke to him before Christmas and said, this is what we want to do, he immediately said, and he works at a high level with the World Council of Churches, he said, I will be there. And he meant that. Shortly after Christmas, he was diagnosed with cancer. And he said, listen, try and put off your conference as long as you can until I am through the treatment, and then I will be there. Now, it emerged as the months went on that that was not going to be possible. And until really a few weeks ago, he was still looking at coming. When that absolutely wasn't possible, we decided we would do a recording of a conversation around some of these important issues. We did that on Tuesday. The Monday, the day before, he got more challenging news about his condition, so his head was kind of in a different space. But he said, I will do this. We had to do it in one take, and what you're going to do is listen to it now, filter out my voice, listen to his, because he has got some things to say. So we're going to listen to that conversation, which was taken in one go because he had to go for a doctor's appointment immediately afterwards. So thank you for your consideration and your tolerance. Peter, it is so good to see you. And listen, thank you for taking the time to talk to us today with so much going on in your life.
Well, thank you so much, and friends there. I'm so sorry I'm not able to be with you in person. I would have liked that very much. I wanted to say a couple of things as we start. First of all, I am really grateful that you are raising this conversation together and seeking to address this together in community, seeing the connections even though you are so far away from Gaza and the situation for Palestinian people in those territories. And to say that I work for the World Council of Churches, and the World Council of Churches is working in this area, but it's not my area of work, and so I don't pretend to speak properly and formally for us in that way, but to speak from my and how this kind of is a dimension of that, I think, in a range of ways. Now, you were kind enough to refer. I've recently been diagnosed with cancer, and I'm having treatment, and it's difficult and aggressive at times. But I am going freely to the hospital here in Geneva, and I am deeply aware and mindful of the health inequalities globally, but especially as we think about all that is happening in Gaza, how hospitals have been targeted, and now not just hospitals, but medics and their families. And so, you know, I feel like my mind is blown by all of this. I feel like Hannah Arendt might have described this as banality of evil. Yeah. There's so much normalization of this violence and feeling deeply grateful then that in all the ways that our political and religious institutions are being silent about this, or actively conniving and supporting the state of Israel in its action in Gaza and the West Bank, that you are speaking out and up. And I really appreciate all that you are going to share, and will do my best to share at least a little today, Marky. So thank you.
Listen, thank you for that, Peter. That is super. Now, we know that the WCC has been working in the Middle East, in the occupied Palestinian territories, and indeed in Gaza, long term. So, can you outline for us, what has the policy been? And in your view, what have the achievements been? What is going well in all of that work? And significantly, how has this been impacted by the most recent onslaught in Gaza?
Thank you. So, I think there are two main areas that maybe I could point to. I mean, there is the whole kind of political role, in some ways small p and large p, that our leadership tries to take and has been taking for some time in the context of the Palestinian struggle. It's largely focused around a kind of peacemaking approach, let's say, and our General Secretary has spoken at various times. We have in the past had visitation to the Palestinian territories by our senior leadership, and indeed the Israeli border authorities detained our former Deputy General Secretary and kept her in solitary confinement for 24 hours before returning her to Geneva. And so we are known in that sense and mistrusted, let's say, by many of the Israeli authorities and how that is played. But it is largely in this kind of call to desist from the violence. We are not, I think, an organization that is amplifying, for example, the Palestinian voices that say, we are not here to desist, we are here to resist. And so this is still a kind of dimension of our, if you like, I don't know, kind of, what would you call it, global statecraft that our senior leadership sees the WCC playing even-handedly, criticizing Hamas and Israel in equal terms and so on. And this has been the policy for some time. But another part of our long-term commitment is the EAPI program, the Ecumenical Accompaniment of Palestinian and Israeli Territories, where 20 or 30 people are recruited over a 3-month period to go and be kind of, to accompany, as it was, Palestinians coming through checkpoints and being present and therefore being an international eye on the scene, let's say. And this has been running for 20 years. And it had to stop in the immediate follow-up for the October attacks and all of that. It has restarted, as is important, not least because everything that is happening in the West Bank. It is only located in the West Bank. We don't have a presence in Gaza beyond the churches, in that sense, who belong to the fellowship. But I think this has actually helped us shift a little bit. EAPI has actually hosting a couple of meetings, which is kind of reframing the WCC's policy now around the slogan, stop annexation, end the occupation. And I think that's both the kind of to do with the ecumenical experience of the accompaniers who are going and have been going for a generation to see this and speak out in different ways, but actually how the Middle East Council of Churches and the Palestinian leaders of the EAPI program are saying, we need to change the tone on this, you know? So this has been a feature of kind of the recent work, and I know, for example, our Central Committee, which will meet in Johannesburg a little bit later in June, is going to receive, materials to make a statement that I think could be stronger than we've made in the recent times. But as I say, I think you could characterize our approach in general terms in this kind of white political way of, mediating, calling on parties to desist, that we are somehow in a position to kind of mediate. And I think the Middle East Council of Churches and others are saying, no man, we are not here as mediators. This is our life, right? We are the ones being bombed, our territory, our land, we as Palestinians. And so this is challenging, I think, some of the statecraft, let's call it, of some of our leadership. But we are waiting to see how that develops and may develop in the coming time, because certainly the tone has shifted since all that has occurred since March and all that has been done after the so-called ceasefire to actually accelerate the occupation and devastation.
I mean, I suppose, Peter, that sounds as if incrementally over the last 20 years, with the accompaniment side of things, there are moves going on. One of the things that really interests me about the WCC analysis is the use of the term settler colonialism to name a key barrier to justice and peace. So do you want to say more about that whole concept of settler colonialism? And how does that term help us to understand what is really going on in Gaza and in Palestine? And does it give us a way to link what is happening in Palestine and Gaza to other issues in the world, so that we're not looking at this horror in Gaza as something separate, but as part of a bigger picture. And this is just an intensification of that at this point in time.
Certainly, I mean, I would need to say that the term settler colonialism is contested. It's not a term our leadership might be comfortable with in the way that it can be, but as you might expect. But so, for example, my area, the Commission for World Mission and Evangelism, we have been working for, well, certainly the last 10 years on developing a particular perspective to locate ecumenical missiology, and that's called Mission from the Margins. The idea that people at the margins both are privileged in the sense of the location of God's Spirit. This is where God's Spirit can be found amongst those who are resisting marginalization, that the agency with which marginalized people come is leading us to remake our world and create against these oppressive realities. And so Mission from the Margins, which has also been contested in the global mission conversation ever since, nevertheless remains a key part of my commission's commitment. This is manifested, let's say, first of all, in two particular communities. So the Commission for World Mission and Evangelism works in combination with EIPN, the Ecumenical Indigenous Peoples Network, and the Indigenous people who have been part of the WCC's conversation for many years and in the mission conversation, are pointing to the historic legacies of colonization and the persistent remaining patterns of that, and how settler colonialism has marked out Christian mission for 500-600 years, ever since Christopher Columbus sailed the oceans blue. And this has been a consistent part of their voice to confront us, to see it located in the violence that's done to indigenous communities, indigenous people, to the land, and the way in which land is occupied and taken, and the way in which profit and capital is privileged in the face of indigenous people's rights and their claim. And alongside that, we also work with EDAM, the Ecumenical Disabilities Advocacy Network, who again are pointing to how particular forms of human identity are again given superiority and supremacy, are valued over others, and particularly in the context of people with disabilities, are denigrated and demeaned, as indeed we see with Indigenous people, as indeed we have seen in the history and persistence of anti-Black racism and so on. So the Commission has begun, to kind of work on this and to try and understand also mission complicity in that. So we are, that's been part of it. But this tradition, as we say, 500-600 years of colonial expansion in which certain people have taken to themselves the privilege and power to say, your land is my land, your resources, I need your resources and I will take them. And I have constructed around a kind of ideology, both of the world, of God, of human identity, that permits and legitimizes this. And this settler colonialism, as you say, Marky, is connected with many things. Now, I'm sure there are friends here who are not with us in this meeting because this is not about climate, or this is not about food justice. This is not about poverty. We are not interested in the Palestinian cause. This is not our cause, and so on. But these crises are all connected in a global system. Some call it empire, some call it sin, some call it the capitalocene, some call it the Anthropocene. What it is that the kind of capital move, the movement of capital interest to reshape and claim our world, so that it is perfectly, understandable as a logic that what is happening in Gaza, what IDF are doing, what Netanyahu is justifying, and how Trump and J.D. Vance are amplifying this, and how Starmer and Lamy and British politicians are remaining silent about this, and so on. And we are seeing all of these connections that are challenging us and tell us at the same time that this cannot be changed. This is how the world is. This is how things should be. And I'm particularly mindful in this context, especially as I go back to EDAN, the Disabilities Advocacy Network, and some recent work of theirs, where they talk about the Spirit not making us normal, but making us new. So that you cannot look at the devastation in Gaza as being normal. And what Gaza is commissioning us to do and to be is to counter-create against all of these different power interests, something that is new. And so I wondered what to wear today. So I wore my t-shirt, Stop Killing the Poor, which comes from the Philippines. I was in the Philippines a few years ago for a solidarity visit with the World Council of Churches and met with victims of the red tagging, of the violence of Duterte against so-called drug dealers, the taking of land in Mindanao of indigenous people, the Islamophobia that surrounds all of that around this particular set of indigenous people, and the sense that Mindanao is a Muslim community, and again how this is used as justifiable then for the Philippine military to, and also private corporate interests to kind of unleash violence there. So this is back in 2019 that I am in the Philippines listening to the widows and the mothers of young men who have been murdered, and their slogan, Stop Killing the Poor, speaks to what we are doing to the earth, what we are doing in so many places, in Haiti, in Yemen, in all of these different locations. And this is all connected with the power that feeds on this and profits from this. And so the organization who offered us hospitality in Manila is called Rise Up. And this is the name, and this is the work of mission for me, as I say, in that, as we kind of look at this 600 years of history that we have to kind of cast off and out as sin. We have denounced in the WCC racism as sin, but racism is a product of colonialism, and we have not spoken about this as sin. Imagine what this would do in the conversations in the WCC in one sense, but also in our own context. I mean, I come from Wales, kind of. I'm mindful in the Irish context of the significance of settler colonialism and all that was done by the English through the Scots to use this as a model to claim land and people and inhabit and possess, as it was in Wales and so on, and then how it became amplified and used globally. So we are dealing with a deep history which is a kind of psychosis and a kind of praxis that we really need each other to dismantle and outgrow and make new. So some of that I am to share, I thought.
Well, thank you for sharing it. And maybe, what the horror that is happening in Gaza is kind of a kairos moment for the West and all of those deep-rooted tendencies and practices that you've outlined for us. And really, so much of the claimed morality of the West is being ripped away. And it is, I think, people at the margins who are leading us on that journey. And I think that that's probably true in Ireland, in this movement and in this meeting today, where you have people who have been trying to engage with kind of what you would call the institutional level of church and have been pushing leaders and ministers and priests and saying, what are we going to do with what is happening in Gaza? How can we remain silent? I was talking to someone really just last week, and he was saying that, it seems to him that the institutional church that is doing kind of that, what you would call official level ecumenism, and that has its role in things, of course it does, but he was saying that it seems to him that that institutional church is paralysed and fearful when it comes to Gaza and trying to speak and trying to, honestly name what is happening. So, WCC is a big organisation, you know, including millions of people. Many, many, many member churches. Do you have that same sense of paralysis and fear? Where do we look for hope?
So I think for us as an institution, we certainly live with the same anxieties around being seen to be too strong or too radical, or, you know, taking sides in particular ways. And we are, I think, witnessing across the, you know, global Christian kind of communities, both a capture by conservative interests and forces that are also part of the settler colonialism model of, you know, of what religion is for. We have a strong tradition. I mean, I work very closely, for example, with my colleague Masiwa from, you know, as the new formation of the Program for Overcoming Racism, which was deeply radical in the 70s and 80s and led to some churches leaving. And it led to all kinds of claims against, you know, the word WCC as a socialist Marxist organization and all those things, because we were wanting to resource resistance in many, many ways. And you and I, Mark, were in the city of colleges with all of these, you know, Namibians and all these people from SWAPO who were all on scholarships with WCC to study in the UK. You know? And in many ways, I think many of us feel we are not able, we want to claim this heritage and this tradition and embody it still, but there are many difficulties, and not least, as so many, how this system works and makes us captive is simply through money. And our resources are, you know, and so can we risk? What do we risk? All of those things are constant battles. But I think to amplify, you know, what you were saying, and I hope this is the case, I see it to a certain extent, and colleagues are saying it, that actually IAPI and the voices of Middle East Council of Churches, of Palestinians who are saying, you know, we cannot speak like this anymore.
Yeah.
And we couldn't speak like it before, but you didn't hear us. Now maybe you're hearing us, and I think that's the kind of community of challenge that, you know, WCC could hope to learn from.
Yes.
Not to be, because I mean, we cannot claim to be that, but to model ourselves as a platform that says, as we've said in the commission, you know, yeah, you can all of these interests that the centre has. We see it as a Babylonian captivity. Yeah. Only when we respond faithfully to the voices of those who are dealing with marginalization and considering how to reshape our witness. Because as you say, this is what it is, and this is what is being martyred in Gaza by Muslim and Christian and non-religious Palestinians in their blood, is to be resistantly who God has made them in the land that God made. And I think this is the challenge that we have to rise to. I am dubious about this in the context of the institution, but in terms of the movements that you represent in this gathering and we see around us, you are commissioning us. And I hope our institutions would be reshaped by that and see the release and the witness in true Christian form that is.
Peter, as you've said, as you've guided us to, at this point in history, probably no more marginalised or abused people than the Palestinians. So listen, thank you for sharing with us today.
Thank you.
And I know that you have got appointments to make today. So thank you for taking the time out to speak to us. And it is always good to talk to you. I extend our thanks on behalf of everybody here. And listen,
thank you.
Light and love and strength for all that lies ahead for you. God bless.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, friends. Thank you, Mark.
And I hope that in the future you're able to be with us in person, and we'll pick up some of the threads of this conversation and take things forward. Listen, bye for now. Best to you, best to Lena. Bye-bye.
Sure, bye.
After listening to yourself so much, I firstly want to apologise a little bit and thank you for listening. We started this afternoon, with voices from Palestine. Muna speaking on behalf of the Ecumenical Church. We ended it with a voice from the Ecumenical Church in Peter. We're now going to have a kind of a plenary session to see what questions there are. We'll start with John's question before lunch, and then we'll draw things to a close to 3:30 as we can manage. So we'll arrange the seats here, take a little breather after all of that listening, and we'll come back for a conversation and some questions. Will that work for people? Okay, let's do that.
Hello. I'm about to sing.
us today. Yeah, so I need to know the background to that. Just got the background to.
I will explain it to you.
I always have to try and get it right. So this
event. Oh, yeah, yeah.
The microphone is on.
I can see where people can say, oh, they were great. No, I hear this.
Ladies and gentlemen, whether you're ready or whether we're not, the plenary session is going to begin and we'll move towards the end of our day together. So, before our lunch break, John had asked the question about the relationship between the Palestinian people and Hamas. So we'll start with that question, and then we'll try and keep the plenary session short and sharp so that we can at least have a nod in the direction of keeping the timings that we had set ourselves. So I've asked Diane to begin to answer that question, and then Rita is going to supplement that, and then Becca can chip in if she wishes.
Right, can everyone hear me? Am I switched on? Right, it's on. Okay, right. Well, I'm certainly no expert on Hamas, but I have read Mentor Isaac, who talks about Hamas, and one of the things he points. Okay, right, sorry. I said I'm no expert at all on Hamas, but I have read Mentor Isaac, who talks about Hamas, and in his book, one of the things he points out is that if you look at the present, there's been no elections for over 20 years. There's been no elections at all. So you can't say at the moment that they're in any way have electoral legitimacy. They don't. Even when you had that election, the number of people that voted for them was far, far from a majority. And the other point is that a lot of them that voted for Hamas were voting against the absolute corruption and subservience of the Palestinian Authority to the Israeli authorities. Plus as well, Hamas is not by any means the only resistance group, and I think it's worth pointing out, if we're looking at Hamas, the way that they turned to non-violence with the great, was it the Long March? 2018, and they were shot down like dogs. So even Hamas has tried non-violent resistance.
Do you want me to answer? I've been asked this question a lot, and I don't know if you mean by that question is another phrase for if I condemn Hamas or not for what happened on October 7th. But I will answer your question anyway. As Diane said, the last election we had in Gaza for the government was 2006, and it was not a fair election. So we can't say that Hamas is a legitimate government in the legal way. But when we talk about Hamas in the context of the ongoing genocide, we're not talking about them as a government. We're talking about them as a resistant movement. And Palestinians do support any kind of resistant movement that fights this colonial violence. And when we also talk about Hamas in this context, we're not talking about them as just Hamas resistant fighters. It actually, the Hamas resistance movement, not government, it includes many many fighters from all the political parties in Gaza, whether it's the Jihad, Fatah, Jabha Sha'biyya. We have so many, unfortunately, like political division, but the Hamas resistance movement does include all these fighters from all political party, which is in some sort of way unity against these horrific violations has been and still are being committed against us. So I think the whole thing cannot be reduced to the question of condemning or the relationship between Gazans or Palestinians and Hamas, because it's not as simple as that. Because when we talk about, if you're asking about them as a government, then I would say, just like any other government, there are some supporters, there are critics. It's just like any normal government. As resistant fighters, I already told you how everyone, I can tell you, in Gaza and Palestine sees them. And what explains the reason why I'm telling you about them as resistant fighters is Israel's constant attempts to get rid of them in the West Bank and other parts of Palestine, because at the end, they're resisting colonial occupation and violence, and I think that's what we should all pay attention to condemning, instead of condemning a small armed group that is so not equal to the power that the IDF have. So I would think condemning violations and war crimes and genocidal acts would be a better way of approaching the whole concept of Hamas and resistance and what's going on. That's all I have to say.
So I don't want to at all touch this because it's way beyond my pay grade, but I will say to compare, first of all, even though I'm a boomer, I do learn everything now from, all my news I get from comedians. So I heard a comedian say very recently exactly what has already just been said, that the last election was in 2006. So if you think about the fact that Palestine, the demographics, 50% are under the age of 18. So we're talking 50% of Palestine did not vote for Hamas, sorry. So still, again, the number of children that have been killed, they did not vote for Hamas. So the comedian made it much funnier than I'm making it. It's not funny at all, but you understand this is where I learned this fact, that I didn't know that Hamas the last election was 2006. Now, I want to compare to, I do have a friend in Jerusalem, Palestinian, who told me that up until October 6th, there were still, she said the number of protests out in the streets in Jerusalem and throughout Israel against Netanyahu were vast because of what he was trying to do to the Supreme Court. And they were so against him. What happened on October 7th? I compare it to my own country with Bush, with the 2001 attack, where he immediately used that to take away our privacy, to begin aggression against Muslims. And the horrors that then we have now done because of one very small attack, that of course I cry for those 3,000 people that died in 9/11. But it was then used by my government to do horrors against vast populations.
Could I just point out one more thing, because I think this is important, because at the moment we've got a so-called possible ceasefire on the table, and Netanyahu has agreed to it, and Trump has agreed to it, and they're trying to say, oh, Hamas is the obstacle, Hamas is not agreeing to it. But I think it's worth pointing out that part of that is Hamas is meant to disarm, leave, etc. And I think we need to go back to the Reagan administration, and we need to remember Sabra and Shatila, when the PLO at the time agreed to disarm, agreed to leave Lebanon, and did, and then afterwards Lebanese forces, supported by the Israelis and the Americans, went in and massacred unarmed civilians.
Like Becca, this is a question I don't really want to answer. Like Becca, this is a question that I really don't want to answer because it is huge, it is emotive, and it is difficult. Because who wants to support violence, really? We all want to live in peace. That's the end, bottom line. I'm old enough to remember conversations with former British soldiers who were in Palestine at the time of the creation of Israel, you know, when I was growing up. And they really viewed the tactics of the three branches of what became the Israeli Defense Forces very negatively. That is the Haganah and Lehi and the Stern Gang, Lehi being the most extremist of those. I mean, they viewed them as terrorists. And it's hard to disagree with that. And those terrorists became government ministers for many, many years. I suppose Menachem Begin being the most prominent of them. I mean, my question is, in the framing of things, when does a terrorist and a terrorist organization, so-called, become worthy of government and become worthy of listening to and engaging with? And how do we reach that point? I mean, I think that probably the phrase that kind of swirls around our conversation today is that term, settler colonialism. And in many ways, if you look at Hamas outside of its current context, its immediate context, and you go back over the history of colonialism, it's hard to disagree that Hamas is an iteration of endless numbers of colonial resistance movements. You know, in Jamaica, the Kimbanguists in the Congo, so many places around the world. And it is, how do we move beyond those conflicts to peace and justice? Where else do we want to go in the plenary session?
Thank you, Mark. John Park in Dublin. I think where I want to go is, what should you be doing as people in Northern Ireland to influence the British government in the steps that they ought to take? I'm happy to say that in Dublin, the Foreign Minister Simon Harris, the Taoiseach, have both talked about genocide in Gaza. They have both condemned war crimes taking place, and the government is now committed to passing the Occupied Territories Bill to ban trade between the illegal settlements and Ireland. Unfortunately, it's still not clear that that ban will include services as well as goods, but work is being done to try to make sure that happens. What should the British government be doing? When will the British government use words like genocide and war crimes? When will they ban all export licenses of weapons? how can we, or you who live in Northern Ireland, make that happen? So that's my concern.
Thank you, John. Can we take it that what you have said has been heard and we don't really need to discuss it further with our plenary guests, none of whom is from here? And indeed, in our audience today, we are not all Northerners either, but we have heard you.
Yeah, no, I think it's a very, very good question. But I think first and foremost, I've lived in Northern Ireland since 1999. We don't vote for the government at Westminster. We vote for the government at Stormont, and we can't get them to do anything to sort out the problems we've already got at home. Never mind sort out world problems. And the other thing is, if you look at the size of the crowds marching in London, they're massive, and it's not really making any difference. And remember, just go back to the Iraq War. Again, and certainly when I was in Palestine, and just recently a Zoom meeting with Mustafa Barghouti, one of the things that he said has been inspirational. There was 600,000 marched the other week in London. I don't think it makes any difference to the British government whatsoever. They're Tweedledum, they're Tweedledee. We're just like the Republicans and the Democrats now. Doesn't matter what you want, you're going to get people who are devoted to capitalism, militarism, and more austerity for ordinary people.
Love to hear about Palestinian liberation theology. If somebody was give us some pointers.
Right. Well, actually, I think you were the one who mentioned about your name, Atiq, this morning. So I would imagine that you can probably talk to liberation theology, Palestinian liberation theology, better than I can.
Thank you for that, Diane. Palestinian liberation theology really is a branch of the wider concept of liberation theology, which of course originated in Latin America, and it really was based on an understanding of the sociological factors that give rise to conflict and difficulties in societies. What are the root causes of the injustices? How do we address them? And that idea has spread around the world. I shared a platform at one stage with Naeem and heard him speak about Palestinian liberation theology. And it is exactly as Diane has said. It is, how do we struggle in peaceful ways to raise consciousness and to mobilize towards a better future? At that stage, I did say to him, you know, it seems to me, and this now becomes very abstract, that really what we're talking about in Palestine is not so much, or it is a hybrid of liberation theology and post-colonial theology. Because what you want to reach in Palestine, the occupied Palestinian territories, and in relationship with Israel, is a better settlement where there is justice. I guess it is, in as far as you believe, where is God involved? And that is that sense of, as I indicated this morning, that the idea of Exodus, of the primary story of the Jewish people in Exodus, is not an exclusive one. You know? And someone like John Levinson, who's a very fine Jewish scholar, wrote 20 years ago, 25 years ago, around that idea that it is, and he wanted to cling on to that, and he wanted to resist that idea of universality and ubiquity, you know, particularly in Latin America at that point.
Can you hear me? Yes. All right. Yeah, can I just add to that? I think what's important is if you look at liberation theology per se, the one that we're used to, that arose, as you said, Mark, in Latin America, and was very much identified with the Catholic Church. The main thing there was option for the poor. And we all know that John Paul II more or less quashed it. So you don't really have a vibrant liberation theology anymore in the Catholic Church, I don't think. Whereas I think the Palestinian liberation theology has evolved from their own circumstances. And I think what makes it very interesting, if not very exciting, is the fact that it goes I mean, I know that liberation theology and the ideas behind liberation theology affected all the churches, and everybody was influenced by them. But what you have in Palestine is, because the Christian groups are so small, that they're all working together. It doesn't matter whether you're Greek Orthodox, whether you're Lutheran, whether you're Catholic, whether you're Anglican, whatever you are, and that they're not simply pointing this out as something for Christians. They see it as something for everybody of every faith and no faith as well, and I think that's important.
Thank you, Mark. The question was raised about what people in Northern Ireland could do, and that's a very, very important question to ask. But we have only really started a conversation. One of the great things about today is the beginning of creating a space where people can actually meet, talk, be informed, question each other, and begin a process of evolving and understanding that you can bring to the government with conviction, because it's taken time to grow in you. And therefore, you have sharpened your mind, you've sharpened your conscience, and you have sharpened your beliefs. I think that what needs to happen here is that those who are in active ministry still create in their congregations, or maybe they're even homes if the congregation isn't completely with them, spaces where people can talk and learn and meet with folk like yourselves and others, and from the Jewish community, I hope. I've served for 10 years as a council of Christians and Jews, and I knew for a long time that to be anti-Semitic certainly doesn't mean at all to be anti-Jewish. Half the people in Israel at the moment, if not more than half, are against the government of Netanyahu. There's only 24% of people actually who are positively supportive of him. So to criticize the Israeli government is not to be anti-Semitic, it's to be wanting a better form of moral and generous and just government in Israel in relation to the Palestinians. So I hope there is no anti-Semitism developing alongside the call and the working for justice for the Palestinian people. My big issue, my big concern is not just to open up venues for discussion to help us mature from being, to some extent, children in this issue to mature adults who can step into an arena and promote an equal future for both Palestinian and Israelis. But I'm surprised that at the silence of the churches about God. You can go to a church and you would think there was no genocide going on in Gaza. You can go to your churches and you can pray, but never get off your bums and do anything about it, which is a form of really insincerity. But I'm surprised that within the Jewish community, I'm not hearing voices raised in the prophetic tradition, because Moses gave us 10 commandments. The 6th commandment, thou shalt not commit murder. That should be the strongest message that we send. And the Jewish community who gave us these scriptures sends into this conflict. The 8th commandment is, thou shalt not steal. It seems to me that the development of the settlement movement is a form of land theft, not unlike the land theft in Ireland in our colonial past as well. So there are echoes of our past as well there. And also with regard to Trump's idea of what to do with Gaza, the 10th commandment is, thou shalt not covet thy neighbour's house, nor their families, nor their lands, nor their possessions, nor anything that belongs to your neighbour. Because we've been reminded in the Mosaic prophetic tradition, that we're to love our neighbours as ourselves. And I was told by a prominent Jewish person that when a Jewish person says to you, you shall love your neighbour as yourself, what that means is you shall love your neighbour as if they're part of your own family. So what I'm saying here is that we need, as believers, passionately in these values, to start rediscovering them, articulating them, because they're not out there. I hear very few people speak about what really God is looking for in terms of our allegiance and the resolving of these issues. And I think the last thing I want to say is, as long as you have a hyper-extreme government in Israel under Netanyahu, you will have extreme resistance responses like Hamas in Palestine. But as we discovered from the IRA negotiations, that when you sit down with people and you offer them and you present to them a future that we can work out together to live in peace and justice together, then attitudes want to embrace that rather than the continuation of violence, which has no future apart from more graves and more sorrow and more despair.
Any responses to Ken? And thank you, Ken, for that.
No, actually, mine was something else about what we can do.
I'm a member of MAGS, Mothers Against Genocide, and the BDS movement and the IPSC, of which Sue, as a Jew, was arrested outside Barclays. So there's actually quite a lot going on, but we had a meeting of MAGS yesterday, and the lobby group has been in touch with the politicians in Stormont. Now, they've got a mixed reaction, obviously, and there's some parties who are never going to meet them. But Claire Hanna has been in touch with them a number of times and has spoken in Westminster about it. Colin Eastwood has. But also they have, which I thought was very hopeful, they've got Robbie Butler from the Ulster Unionist Party. Now, he was very clear and very honest about his opinion of the Israeli state and how he sees that as a valid state. But what he did say, he's obviously very concerned about what is going on, particularly as in his party, he is an officer for children and young people. So he is working with the ones out of the lobby group from MAGS to try and have statements that he could maybe bring some of the rest of the party along with him on it. And he's going to meet them again. And they are meeting Michelle O'Neill on Tuesday. So there is a lot of things going on. There's a lot of boycotting. The BDS has had a lot of effect on places like Starbucks, Coca-Cola, McDonald's. You see them all. McDonald's are actually going around the GAAs at the moment, offering packages for schools and kids, and so they are being hit. So I think that's hopeful. Just one more point, very, very quickly. There's a lot of Jewish people across the world and inspirational people like Norman Finkelstein, Gabor Mate, and people like that who are anti-Zionist. But in a recent poll in Israel, 82% of them voted for the ethnic cleansing of Gaza. So I think we have to be very careful, and Norman Finkelstein has said this for years, that we can't just blame it on real right-wing extreme people, because they are getting a lot of support.
Thank you.
I think when I started to be concerned and wanted to do something, one of the things I've been doing is learning and I have a number of books with me that have helped me. And if anyone wants to borrow, just come and see me afterwards. But one in particular I got recently, We Are Not Numbers, as Rita and Nora both emphasised. So anyone who would like to borrow books, come and see me.
Thank you.
Thanks, Mark. Well, I'll just do a shout out as well for Christians for Palestine, because Jacinth there is a member of Christians for Palestine, and there's members of the organisation dotted around here everywhere. So that's something that's it's easy to look us up on Instagram, and actually there's one of the other speakers, the lady from MAGS, was talking about BDS and MAGS, and there's even more in Belfast. I think I counted a dozen the last time I totted it up. So if you're interested, certainly, one way to get involved is to just go onto Instagram, go onto Facebook, go onto YouTube, find out what's going on, and get onto a WhatsApp group of one of the organisations that you may feel you relate to, and get onto the WhatsApp group, but turn off notifications, or else your head would be completely melted. But it's a way of learning what's going on, and also finding a way to connect with other people who are doing things, and we are making a difference. We're annoying the BBC, we're annoying the police, we're annoying the people in power, because they're not able to get away with what they're doing in complete silence. We are making an impact, and we will continue to. So thank you.
This isn't a question, this was a statement. I'll keep it short. I think there's a real need for an educational process here. We hope to get a Christians for Palestine website up and running. It's already, a lot of work has been done on that, so there's a need to upload a lot of resources. I studied this 30 years ago at a sort of master's and pre-PhD level, and then life intervened, but then everything comes around full circle. And so for me, for the last 18 months, it's just been jaw-dropping horror, but it's also a challenge to re-educate myself as to the totality of the process and get to grips with the biggest, darkest aspect of this, apart from mass slaughter, which is the oxymoron, which is Christian Zionism. We need, certainly as Protestants, we've imbibed that like mother's milk. It's just taken in, and so that's a generalization, but for a large number of Protestants, maybe evangelicals, there's a complete read across to one from community here to one community there, with elements of chosen peoples cascading back to ourselves, and in America, it's another chosen land as well. So we really need to educate ourselves that. I don't know the way forward for that, but I do really feel this is a pioneering moment here today. We need to keep those alliances going, and we need to meet in small groups and actually discuss things, probably, hopefully with people we don't agree with. But in terms of, I'm really delighted to hear about Robbie Butler. I wrote to every unionist politician. He was one of the few that did write back. I've got some responses from others from unlikely sources, one of which I'm going to be meeting for coffee shortly. If we come in there not finger pointing, but talk in terms of international law, humanitarian law and justice. And I can tell my backstory of 4 generations Lurgan Orange men, but my dad and all his mates, compositors in the newsletter, signed up in 1939, and we're in France in New Year's Eve, New Year's Eve of 39. And a tremendous sacrifice. They bought us with their blood a system of international humanitarian law and a genocide convention, and all things that betokened a better world. Now, for Protestant people, my argument is we cannot throw that away. That's been bought for us We have contributed to that, and do you really want to see yourselves as a movement, or even as a theocratic movement, aligned with images of skeletal children? There's something better out there than that. But we need to have a conversation with those political parties who, I don't think the door's completely shut. It's nuanced, but they're capable of being moved. And I sense an undertow of wanting to move if we could find the way to reach out to them.
With the mention of Lurgan, I'm going to pass the microphone to Anya to tell us about a walk from Lurgan next week.
Hello everybody, I'm a member of Newry IPSC and Christians for Palestine, and all of the IPSC groups, Lurgan, Portadown, Armagh and Newry, are organising a march from Lurgan to Newry, which is the length of Gaza, approximately 25 miles. And we're just asking everybody if you can, there's social media posts up on all the platforms, if you could just, it was in the Irish News yesterday, so if people would like to attend, they can pick a point and they can walk from a different point to there's no, if there's going to be collection points if people want to make a donation, but it's not compulsory. It's just a march for solidarity, and the significance of it being that it's the same length as the actual Gaza Strip from Lurgan to Newry. So please, if you're interested, just find out on the internet, on any of the platforms, and come along and walk with everybody else. And hope to see you there next Saturday. Next Saturday starts off at 8:30 in Lurgan and finishing up around, I think possibly 7, 7:30 in Newry. There's actually Dundalk IPSC are going to walk from Newry to Omeath. And if it's a nice evening and people are feeling still energetic, they can do that also. So hope to see you all there next Saturday. Thank you.
There reaches a point in an agenda on a Presbyterian meeting for any other business. And there comes a point in any other business when I always put it to either session or committee. We've now reached the stage for any other relevant business. And they know what I mean. Does anyone want to have a last word, or I'll give the last word to the panel?
Thank you. I would just like to ask the panel, what countries is there in this peaceful world, right, that we live in, is financially gaining big time by this war and by the suffering, not only of the Palestinian people, but also the people in Israel? They're suffering too. There's not a word about them. I'm surprised. There should have been somebody here representing the Israelites. So, who on the panel can answer what country is benefited big time financially by these wars going on? Question.
Yeah, this is mine. I get this one. I've been sitting. This is actually what I've been sitting here thinking. Do I take responsibility? Betsy, you and I? Or do we have any other Americans? US Asians? So for me, the really most difficult, I thank you for the question, because this is the most difficult thing to me. As much as I want to think that the Palestinians are relevant in this conversation, in a way they're not because of this. Don't hear me wrong, hear me rightly. This is my own country, American stockholders who are stockholders in military corporations making weapons. Because what happens when I hear my own congressmen and women have voted to give Israel $2 billion, let's say, that $2 billion does not even go to Israel. There's no sending a check to Israel. The money goes straight to the weapons manufacturers because the military wants new weapons. They're tired of the old ones that they have, and they want new ones. So we give the old ones to Israel, $2 billion worth, whatever we set that price. And then our military gets brand new weapons with that $2 billion. This is happening today. This is what is happening right now. So actually, in a way, Palestinians, I'm sorry, I hope you understand what I mean, are irrelevant. And what scares me the most is this is my brothers and sisters in my country who have stock, and they do not realize they are guilty. They have gone to a mutual fund. They've put their money in because they want a pension, and that mutual fund sanitizes it for them and invests. And what I don't know how to do, and I'm simply planting a seed here, is how do I go to Americans and say, corporate responsibility, how are you calling our corporations? Because even the governments are irrelevant because they're dancing to the tune of these huge corporations who are making trillions of dollars on weapons sales. You don't think Iraq, Afghanistan, the ones I talked before, I said it played into Bush's hands. It played into weapons manufacturers' hands. So I totally agree with boycotting, but I feel like we got to boycott more than just businesses. I agree. So I have not had, I love Coca-Cola and I haven't had it in over 2 years. I don't miss McDonald's. I don't miss Starbucks. I do miss Coke. But so I think, I totally agree with boycotting, but I think we have to go to the financial route, and how do we do the corporate responsibility? It is the corporations that are doing this.
Right, I think you're asking a very, very important question. What about the Israelis? And when I was in Palestine, every person that we encountered, which was a lot, we'd have 3 or 4 or 5 meetings a day, and my question was always the same one: whose war is this? The West, including America, the European Union, Canada, Australia, Canada, I've already said Canada, and the response was always from everybody, both it's Israel's war, but it's America's war as well, and the West's war, apart from Munther Isaac. And Munther Isaac, and I would be inclined to agree with him, what Munther Isaac pointed out, what he argued, was this is the West's war, that Israel is being used as an outpost of the West. It's like we could look at Russia and Ukraine and look at the loss of life in Ukraine, but there's none of our troops, there's no Western troops that have been lost. Whether you agree what side you take, what your position is. And we saw this all through the Cold War as well, proxy wars. The Americans don't like to lose soldiers, but they make an awful lot of money from weapons, as does Britain. Britain's equally as guilty as are some of the Western nations. So I think it's a very good point. And certainly when I was in Palestine, this is what the Palestinians themselves are very, very aware of, that the Israelis are as much victims of the system that has been created. They're indoctrinated from birth. They're full of hate. Not all of them, because as I say, some do make that journey, but it's a very difficult journey because you pay a very, very high price. And we see Jewish voices outside of Israel that condemn Israel and say Israel is creating anti-Semitism and it's destroying Judaic values. So I think that's very important, and that we and this was the message to people in our delegation who were suggesting, as I said when I was talking, the Israelis are evil, the Jews are evil, we hate them, etc. And the Palestinians were the ones saying no. No, we won't think like that, and can see how both peoples are being hurt by this, and the only way forward is for the two peoples together to create something new, better, where they can all have security and peace and equality.
I think we've got one last contribution. John?
Let us say you manage to get a ceasefire. What's going to happen on the other side of the ceasefire? Mark said the two-state solution was dead. What's the alternative?
Well, I think if we can go back to the past, and what we've got to look at is that systematic Israeli police were mowing the lawn. So, all right, we have a phenomenal massacre, genocide here that the whole world is now aware of. In the past, there was slow genocide. I think that was the term that was used, Rita, wasn't it? A slow genocide, and that we try and wipe them out bit by bit, or make life so miserable they'll leave, so on and so forth. Now that failed. That absolutely failed. There's now 7 million plus Palestinians, and they are as resistant as ever. You know, the more Israel does, the more they resist, and I think that was the point that you made, Mark. So the big problem is that even if Israel says there will be, and America says there will be a ceasefire, these are governments that just lie and lie and lie. And we know that the previous ceasefire, well, it wasn't a ceasefire. Israel kept on bombing all the way throughout. Look at the humanitarian, whatever it was called, where they were meant to deliver food. And the evidence has already come out that starving people going for food were shot. Drones were shooting them and hurting them, and even tank fire. Someone's been found with tank shrapnel in his neck. So that, you know, all these things that have been put forward, we have to be very, very wary of. And I don't have any faith in either the American, the Europeans, the British, or the Israelis to adhere to a ceasefire. The Zionist project remains strong within the government and within the population. As Daria pointed out, the most recent poll was 82% of the Israeli public support ethnic cleansing. And it's quite a high percentage that actually support, even if that means killing everybody. Certainly I think it was 47%, wasn't it, that support that. So the only way that you're going to have a ceasefire that would, well, at the end of the war and a move towards peace and reconciliation is precisely by the South African pattern. The world, and that's us. Like when we talk about the church, that's us as well. So if your church leader, if your pastor, if the bishops, if the House of Lords or the bishops there, the Pope, whoever, if they're not going to speak out, people in the pulpit need to speak out, need to take action. You don't need to wait for direction. You know what's right and wrong. You can read your Bible just as much as anybody else. So I don't see us, I don't see the West, because if you look at Western policy, it's all about destroying and fragmenting the Gulf states. And earlier it was asked about, you know, what we can do. But remember, if you look at the Arab states, if you look at the Gulf states, they are part and parcel of what is going on. They're there with Donald Trump, they're doing transactions. We need to recognize that there are wealthy elites, and it's not just the Palestinians or the Israelis that are expendable. We are expendable. They don't need us. They've got AI coming up soon. They won't need us. They won't need us virtually at all. They might need us to buy things. You know, that's our only freedom nowadays, isn't it? Shopping. So the process has to be something like what happened in South Africa. Ordinary people mobilizing to isolate not just Israel, but to recognize what the West is. And remember, if you look at your history, this is by no means the first genocide of the 20th century that I'm thinking of. They started straight away. And it's very often indigenous peoples. And I'm not talking about settler colonialism. Here it used to be, the excuse used to be anti-communism. Remember Hitler even walked into the Soviet Union, or rather invaded the Soviet Union, declaring that it was in defense of the West and Christian civilization. And then we took that same mantra for the Cold War, and now it's terrorism, that we have to defend the world against terrorism. But all these things simply become a vehicle for capitalism and militarism. So I think if Palestine has done anything, it has ripped away that mask of the West being a force for good. And we need to learn the lessons and learn that we can be victims as well. I mean, people here in Northern Ireland know just how expendable people can be. So I think that recognition and recognizing that we do have power. I don't think we can shift our governments, but certainly we know from BDS and MAGS, etc., that you can shift on the local level. And if we're all doing that, then we can make a difference. And I have more faith in people power than I do in any of our governments or any of our churches.
I'm going to draw us to a close. Thank you. I'm going to invite the panel to take their seats, and we'll proceed to the end of our day today. I really want to thank you all and those who have been involved today for what we have heard. So thank you to one and all. Chris Hedges is a name that some of you might know. He is a journalist, a war correspondent. He is also a minister of the Presbyterian Church USA. He has written this recently. Gaza puts to rest the lie of human progress, the myth that we are evolving morally. We drop 2,000-pound bombs on refugee camps, spray families with bullets from militarized drones, or pulverize them with tank shells, heavy artillery, and missiles. We are entering a new dark age. The genocide in Gaza has imploded the subterfuges we use to fool ourselves and attempt to fool others. It mocks every virtue we claim to uphold. It is a testament to our hypocrisy, cruelty, and racism. We cannot, having provided billions of dollars in weapons and persecuted those who decry the genocide, make moral claims anymore that will be taken seriously. Our language from now on will be the language of violence, the language of genocide, the monstrous howling of the new dark age, one where absolute power, unchecked greed, and unmitigated savagery stalks the earth. That is bleak. And it is a possible reality. However, there are other realities, and we've touched on those today. Some of you might know the name Howard Zinn. He was an American historian. His big book was A People's History of the United States. So it is history from the underside. Taking that to a global level, someone like Vijay Prashad from India has written a book, The Darker Nations, A People's History of the Third World. It signals to us that there are other voices, there are other places, and we stand in solidarity with those in the Third World who, as we have already noted, know in their bones what is going on in Gaza. more than we do. So we need to broaden our perspective beyond what we see in the West and our own fears and our own sense of decline and perhaps shame at what is going on. Howard Zinn says this: historically, the most terrible things, war, genocide, and slavery, have resulted not from disobedience, but from obedience. We don't have to engage in grand, heroic actions to participate in the process of change. Small acts, when multiplied by millions of people, can transform the world. That is where our littleness comes in. Share another quotation. It is about the origins of Christianity in that pre-Constantinian context. And it says, Christianity is based on a single rejected fact, the resurrection. As a form of knowledge, it could only have been second class, first witnessed by the second-class citizens of Israel, the women. It is difficult to remember how particular and personal this fact was, an experience of a few women and men in an imperial backwater. The preaching of the gospel began as they broadcast rejected facts in the teeth of the dominant illusion of the temple and the Roman Empire. It seems to me that what we are trying to do is to reject the dominant illusion of our world, particularly the Western world, and the empire and imperialism as it exists today. You heard a song, a hymn of liberation this morning. We were passive in that. What we're going to do to end our day is to become more active in that. So I will invite you to stand, and what we're going to do is we're going to sing. Lift every voice and sing. And we're going to have some people to help us if we don't feel up to singing, but please do. Jacinth and ladies to the front, and we will sing. witness to the terrible wrong being done in Gaza and to play your part, your tiny part, in turning the tide. Ceasing what your conscience and heart and deepest conviction tell you is the good for Gaza, wider Palestine, and the world, until the tear is wiped from every eye and everyone is able to sit under their own vine and fig tree, and no one will terrorize them or make them afraid. Amen.